Well, good morning, everyone. Warren, thank you. Good morning. Let me track down my glasses here and we'll get going. So, last week we saw as Jacob arrived in Haran. He took that 450-mile journey from Beersheba across the desert, a place inhabited with Canaanites, a dangerous place. He arrived outside Haran. He had no idea where he was. If you remember, he asked them, "Where am I?" They said, "Oh, we're right outside Haran." And then he asked about, "Do you know Laban?" They said, "Indeed, we know Laban. And in fact, here comes Rachel, his youngest daughter, with his sheep, with his goats." And again, we saw once again God supernaturally superintending over people, and they don't even realize it. Jacob is traveling 450 miles, and he's going to meet up at the precise time with the woman he's going to marry. The woman he'd been commanded to go find one of Laban's daughters. Laban only had two, and here's one of them, and she arrives while he's standing there asking questions. If you remember, he was interacting with those shepherds, kind of amazed at their silly protocol in reference to the well, and then he looks over. And it's like he just like broke contact with the shepherds. Like, "I'm so done with you guys." And he went over to the well. He rolled that stone. He watered her sheep, took it straight out of priority, broke all protocols. And we get the hint that he had begun immediately to fall in love with Rachel. Again, he loved her with all his heart. We saw as the sort of movie developed that he worked for Laban for a month. And then Laban said, "Okay, you're a great guy, you're a great worker, but you're my kinfolk. What are your wages? I need to pay you. You shouldn't just work for free." And you remember what he said. He said, "Here's the deal. I'll work for 7 years for the hand of your younger daughter. I'll pay her bride's price, 7 years of labor. I'll work for 7 years for her hand." And men, I ask you, would you have told your wife's dad, "Here's the deal. I'll work no pay, just room and board for 7 years if I can marry your daughter"? That's how much he loved her. I know every man said, "I would have." Yeah, amen, hallelujah. They all said it. And so that's true for all of us. I get it. I just want to make sure. Just checking the group I was with. And so we're told that those 7 years passed like that because of the great love that he had for Rachel. And then there was that week-long celebration. They were celebrating the first day. It was going to be that night that the marriage was consummated. It was that night, in the darkness of the night, that Laban likely slipped Leah into the tent in place of Rachel. We had so many questions, but Leah was silent for sure. She didn't say a word. And there in the darkness, she was likely veiled. He consummated the marriage with the wrong daughter, with the older daughter. You can imagine the next morning when he awoke, we had the exclamation mark. That was not Rachel. And he went to Laban. "What have you done? Why did you do this to me? Didn't we have a deal?" And Laban told him this. Laban said, "It's not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn." He said, "Listen, that's not how we do it around here." Now, again, if that was true, it seems like Jacob would have heard about that for the 7 years that he had already been there. As he was in the marketplace, they would say, "Yeah, who are you? I see you're new around here." "Oh, my name's Jacob. I'm from Beersheba. I'm living with Laban, and I'm going to marry his youngest daughter here in 7 years. I'm working for right now." And they might, "Dude, that's not like how it works. He's got an older daughter. She's got to be married first." No one told him this. It's likely this is what Laban wanted to do. That's why these two girls have both been single for so long. He's just the victim of it right now. Verse 27, "But he told him, complete the week of this one." Now that's the week of Leah. What he's saying is complete the celebration, go ahead and marry her, follow through, complete the deal, close the contract, and in doing that, I will give you the other also. It's like a BOGO. It'll be a buy one, get one. Go ahead and, I know, right? You probably don't think Laban said BOGO. But he said, "Listen, I'll give them both if you'll just finish the week with the older daughter." Now, he didn't wait 7 more years for Rachel. He married her 1 week later. That was the deal. But he had to labor for 7 years. That was the deal. He gave his word that he would work 7 years for her. So imagine this. You're Jacob. You went up there, directed to get away from the anger of your brother because of your deception, directed by your mom. You're going to find a bride. You're going to come back after he calms down. 7 years have gone by. And now you're committed to 7 more years. You're going to be gone from home for sure 14 years. There's a question in the back.
And what were the age differences between Jacob and his wives?
We don't know the age differences. We're guessing about 20 years. We're guessing they're 20 years younger, and I want you to hold that in your mind when I bring them up. We don't know exactly, we're not told. But we're guessing based on the genealogies and the fact that Isaac and Rebekah was barren for 20 years, if you remember that. Remember, Isaac was crying out, he was pleading to God. So if we just make their families happening at the same time and insert that 20-year delay, then roughly speaking, they're probably 20 years younger than Jacob. And we're going to look at Jacob's age here in a second. So I'm going to show you that because I want you to see it this morning. But Linda has a question while we're still in the introduction.
Based on the week, perhaps equaling 7 years, does this have any indirect message related to Daniel and the 70 weeks?
So it's a great question. I don't think it does, but I understand the question. So she's going back to Daniel chapter 9, and she's asking, is this week in any way a picture of the final 7 years of Daniel's prophecy, if I understand from Daniel chapter 9, if I understand your question correctly. I do not think so, but now let's just be totally transparent about this question in general. There are many scholars, many is not a good word, there are some scholars who believe that he had to labor for another 7 years. For example, Chuck Missler, I know many of you love Chuck. Chuck holds that position, that he had to labor another 7 years. But I would say the preponderance of theologians believe, no, he did the week for Leah, and that was a literal week, and then he married Rachel immediately, like it says. Equally, you run into some extreme time concerns if you don't do it that way. We'll see that in just a second. But I just think it's just, hey, fulfill the week of her, this week-long celebration. Go ahead and complete the marriage, and I'll let you have the other one also. But you owe me 7 more years. You owe the bride's price for her as well. So that's what was presented to him, and ultimately he said, I will do it. Why? Because he loved Rachel. In fact, he loved Rachel so much that when you compared his love for Rachel against his feelings for Leah, it was like he hated her. And that's not my words, that's the Bible's words. So that's not Rich's idea. And then we read this, and this is where we ended last week. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, that's not Rich's words, that's God's words. Now, but here's the point. It's not that he hated her, he had children by her. They had a relationship together, but when you compared their love, it's the same way that Jesus said, if you love me, you'll hate your mom and your dad. He's not saying go hate your mom and dad. He's saying your love for me, if you truly love me, will be so much different that when compared to your parents or even your kids, it's like you hate them. We don't hate them. I love my mom and dad dearly, but not like I love my Savior. And the problem was, and this is a problem, Jacob loved Rachel like that, but he didn't love Leah like that. And that becomes a problem in the eyes of God because that's his wife. And here's the problem. God is a God who leans into indifference, who leans into bad stuff, who leans into people being mistreated and mishandled. And he's going to lean into this one, and we see what he does. So Leah is being mistreated for sure by Jacob, likely by Rachel. And the Lord Yahweh saw that Leah was hated. He opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Here we go. Man may do one thing, God will do another. Verse 32, Leah conceived and bore a son. She called his name Reuben. For she said, because Yahweh has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me. We unpack that. I won't say anything else. She conceived again and bore a son, because Yahweh had heard that I'm hated. He's given me the son also. She called his name Simeon. I won't say anything else. We unpacked it last week. Verse 34, again she conceived and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will be attached to me, because I bore him 3 sons. Therefore she called him Levi. Verse 35, she conceived again and bore a son and said, this time I will praise Yahweh. Therefore she called his name Judah, and she ceased bearing children. Now I won't unpack those 4 children again. It's on the tape, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in a moment. But let's look at the outline for today's lesson. Extremely busy today. We'll see that Rachel gives her handmaid Bilhah as a wife, verses 1 through 4. We'll then see Bilhah conceives 2 separate times, has 2 children, 2 male children, Dan and Naphtali, verses 5 and 8. Leah gives her, seeing all this, gives her handmaid Zilpah as a wife to Jacob. You'll see that in verse 9. Zilpah conceives 2 times and bears Gad and Asher, 10 and 13. Leah purchases a night with Jacob. Dysfunctional family 101. Keep in mind as we read the story today, this is descriptive and not prescriptive. Get the difference right? We're being described what went down, not being prescribed how we should run our home. And we get it. Continuing on at what we'll see this morning, Leah conceives and gives birth to Issachar after she purchases Jacob. She first gives birth to Issachar, then Zebulun, and ultimately the only daughter named Dinah. There are other daughters. She's the only one named. We'll talk more about that when we get there. That's verses 17 to 21. God remembers Rachel, and she conceives and gives birth to Joseph, 22 to 24. Just in passing, I have to say it in my outside voice, I'll get a little ahead of my skis. Typically, when you think about the 11th son of a 12-son family, that guy is the lowest rung on the ladder. He's not anywhere in the top 11, and he's not the baby. He is bottom of the bucket. It is through Joseph that God would protect the infant nation of Israel in Egypt. Let me tell you something. Your number doesn't matter. Your history doesn't matter. Walk with God in the details of your life, and God can and will do amazing things in our life. That's the storyline. This was a man who walked with God, and God used him mightily, and that's the lesson we'll take away when we get to him. But I wanted to get a little ahead of my skis for a second just because he's coming up. Jacob enters into a new deal with Laban. We'll see that in 25 through 34. Laban deceives Jacob again. By the way, we're going to see that Laban was constantly, we won't see it this week, we'll see it next week. Laban was constantly changing Jacob's wages. In fact, we're told he changed them 10 times. He was a conniving, trickster, manipulator, always trying to get the upper hand, always trying to stack the deck against his son-in-law, the man married to his 2 daughters. That's Laban. We'll see more of him today. But we'll see he deceives Jacob again. Kitty said, whoa. And then finally, 37 through 43, God blesses Jacob and rapidly expands his wealth, rapidly expands his flocks, takes him from nothing to being a very, very wealthy man with tons of animals, all in a 6-year period. So that's our story today. That's where we're going. It'll be a busy text this morning, so I'll be running through it. And if you guys slow me down, we'll run fast at the end, so don't worry. We'll get there. All right. I didn't show you this last week because I wanted to be sure before I showed it, and I'm as sure as I can get at this point in the game. So here's what I believe, and this will be in your notes next week so that you have hard copy of it, so that you can take it to Genesis, and as you're reading, you can compare and conclude. I believe as we play the movie backwards and map out all these dates, when Jacob left Haran, or left Beersheba to go to Haran, he was 77 years old. That is likely much older than you were thinking. That's why I want to make sure I'm saying it to you. I'm telling you to go find it in the scriptures. Likely his wives were 50 to 60. They were older women too. But again, if Laban was trying to get his tender-eyed daughter married first, that may have been the barrier to getting his beautiful daughter married second. And here's the guy who's going to take them both. And I won't say BOGO because you guys didn't want that. Okay. Jacob marries Leah and Rachel. That'll be 7 years later. Again, if the dates are right, he would have been 84. Jacob is going to father Joseph with Rachel. We'll see that today. That'll be after that next 7. So that'll be after the end of the 7 years. You'll see it from the text why I say that. He'll be 91. Jacob will flee from Laban and go back to Canaan 6 years later to make his total work time 20 years under Laban. We'll see that next week. And then finally, and again, we'll see that next week, so I'll just stop there. We'll end the movie there. I'll have this in your notes next week so that you can keep this clipped out in the front of your Bible. So as you're reading Genesis, you can say, Rich, I think you're wrong, and you can come tell me, or you can say, yeah, I'm sure of it. I agree with you. So I'm not dead level positive, but I'm fairly comfortable on those dates. Okay. So that's everything by way of introduction. That gets us into the text. That sets us up for where we are. We have 4 of the sons who will become the 12 tribes of Israel, all born to Leah. We've named them. It's Reuben, it's Simeon, it's Levi, it's Judah. All born to Leah. That's where we are in the movie. God is birthing a nation, the nation of Israel, the nation whom he intends to bring the Messiah through, the nation who he intends to bring the one who would crush the head of the serpent, the nation who he intends to bring the one who would bless all nations. That's where we are in the movie. 4 down. We're going to look at 7 more today to bring the total to 11. Any questions before we get running on our text this morning? And silence is compliance, y'all. So I can fill the air with noise. All right, let's go. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children. Now again, we watched Leah produce 4 children in fair rapid fire order. She envied her sister. Uh-oh, not a good idea. We'll talk more about that. Then she went to Jacob and said, "Give me children or I will die." Jacob has more power than I have. No, he does not. Okay, so let's walk our way through this. The story unfolds, and we understand that more than likely, as we understand the whole story, Jacob is spending more time with Rachel because he loves Rachel, because Rachel's the beautiful one, because Rachel's the one he's been trying to marry the whole time. So he's spending more time with her, but what's happening? Each time he goes into Leah practically, boom, another child. Boom, another child. Boom, another child. Boom, another child. What's happening in Rachel's heart? Envy, jealousy, frustration, pain, sorrow. Here's what she's saying, and ladies, you know. Why am I not having any children? Why am I not having any children? Why is my sister having all those children? And she began to look upon her, and this is what envy and jealousy does to us. It causes us to forget all the blessings we currently enjoy at the hands of Yahweh right now and to focus on the one thing we don't have that we have to have. And we set aside, forget about everything God has done for me. I got to have that. And we begin to fixate on that, and we become jealous, and it begins to drive us into places we would have never gone in our life like ever. Paul said it this way to the church in Galatia, as he talked about the works of the flesh. These are the works of the flesh. Now, I don't know what comes to your mind when you think of works of the flesh. Idolatry, pornography, those types of things. Let's read Paul's list until we get to my point. Now, the works of the flesh are evident. Sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery. We're all good. Yeah. Enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalry, dissension. Those 2 are works of the flesh. And you see what is happening. Envy and jealousy are welling up in her life. And it is creating chaos in her heart. It's works of the flesh. I would remind you what God told us in the Proverbs. A tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but envy makes the bones rot. And envy will eat our lunch if we don't keep a check on it. We will begin to look at something someone else has, and we will become jealous of it and forget all the blessings we have and say, "God, if you don't give me this, I'm going to die." And that's what she went and told her husband. Now, ladies, I'll pick on you first, but don't worry, it's equal opportunity. Obviously, you know, unlike our sister here, there's only so much your husband can do. And I'm going to be quite frank with you, it's actually very little. You see, everything that you really need, your father can do. And you shouldn't rely on your husband for these types of things. He can't make it happen. There's no way. He can't even get close. She's so hurt and so damaged. She's there at the man she loves. And she's laying it all at his feet as if he did something wrong. And I suspect he's spending a lot more time with her. Okay, men, it's our turn. Verse 2. Jacob's anger was kindled against the woman who he loved with all his heart. Men, you can process that however you want. Anger is a work of the flesh. When our wives come to us hurting, broken, damaged, and say something that may pierce like, "Why are you doing this?" when we're not doing anything, we need to learn to not take the bait. He took the bait. He got angry and got in the flesh. And I want you to look at what he said to the woman who he loved with all his heart. And men, may this never be how we respond to our wife. I pray it is never how I respond to my wife. He starts out with a dead level truth, and then he says something that's very direct and hard. So Jacob's anger is kindled against Rachel, and he says, "Am I in the place of God?" That's true. That's a good response. I would have said, "Honey, that's God. God does that. Let's pray together. Let's cry out to God together. Let's hold hands together right now. Let's plead with God together that God would bring a child into your heart, into your life, into our lives." Am I in the place of God? the God who has withheld from you the fruit of your womb. Now that's true. Is that true? True. Is that harsh? Absolutely harsh. Men, can you imagine how that pierced her heart? He said, listen, your problem is God has withheld it. Something in your life is going on. You go take it up with him. This is not my fault. This is your fault. That's a little, could it be true? I'm not denying truth or not. I'm saying that's not, men, how we want to approach this problem as we talk to our wife. And you can see how he responded in the flesh because of what she said in the flesh. Verse 3. Then she said, here is my servant Bilhah. Go into her so that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her. Okay, we've talked about this practice. This is a custom of the Middle Eastern times. We'll talk more about it if we have time at the end. I do have some things here I want to say, time permitting. But you see what she's saying. She's saying, this is my handmaid. I have the right to give her to you as a wife, and any children that come of that union belong to me. In fact, so much so I get to name them. And so because I'm not having children, I give you my handmaid. You go into her and raise children from her. Now, ladies, I bet this seems very odious to you. This was a custom in those times because of the value of children, in particular men children, because they worked, but all children. So just understand, culturally, this was an accepted practice. Was this a biblical practice? No, absolutely not. One man, one woman, all time. That's the biblical model. But you see what's going on. She has a plan. Now, does this plan sound familiar? Yeah, it sounds very familiar. This was Sarai's plan. This completely blew up the family. This was a completely bad plan. This was the Hagar plan. This was the, I've got an Egyptian servant here, go into her. This resulted in the 12 princes. This was a completely bad plan. One would think that there would have been enough family history for Jacob to go, you know, my grandfather did this. This did not go well. I say we do something different. That's not what he said, man. In fact, it's almost like Abram, he said nothing. Like a cow wandering off to eat. He said nothing and just strolled right in to this disaster. So she said, here's my servant Bilhah. Her name means terror or trouble. Here's my servant Trouble. Sure enough, go into her and have children by her. Verse 4, so she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her. And we would put in after that, I bet in your mind you know what's about to happen. I don't even need to tell you what's about to happen, but you know probably because you've read it. But let's read it again. And Bilhah conceived. No surprise there. We could have predicted how it was going. She bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged me and has also heard my voice and has given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. So Bilhah conceives, and we get her voice here. And here's what Rachel says about this whole thing. God has judged. The Hebrew word is dun. God has dun. God has stepped in and judged between me and my sister. And he has given me a son, so she named him Dawn. She named him Dan. It's a word play. His name means to judge. God has judged, so he gave me this son, and I named him to judge. That's all she's saying. She's saying God is on my side. She's saying God has leaned into this, and he's acted on my behalf, and he's given me a child by this servant, Bilhah. Okay, that's Rachel's commentary. Oh, I'm sorry, verse 7. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. If you're keeping track at home, this is 6. So we've got 4 from Leah, now 2 from Bilhah. Bore Jacob a second son, and actually, these 2 are technically from Rachel, right? But they're really from Bilhah. Then Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings I have wrestled my sister and have prevailed. And she called his name Naphtali. Now, wait a minute. I didn't know there was a wrestling match going on. You see what's happening here. Envy and jealousy. She's in a wrestling match with her sister. That's how in the flesh this whole event has gotten her. And we should not be too hard on her because it can do the same in our life. We can find ourselves, we can let jealousy and envy take us down this exact same path if we are not walking with God and careful. And here she imagines that she's in this She's pitted against her sister to have the most men children. That's the game. She has wrestled with her sister, but don't worry, she's prevailed. That's her commentary. So what she says in the Hebrew is, I've naftul, I've wrestled. So I name him Naphtali, which means my wrestling. It's a word play. His name is nothing more than a word play on the idea of wrestling. It started out as jealousy and envy. It's a wrestling match. And we wonder, though, does Leah know she's in the match? We'll see in a second. Before we advance the story, any questions, any commentary, anything? Kristen has something.
Is there a connection between Bilhah's name and Dan, since Dan essentially in the end is not mentioned in the 12 tribes in Revelation? Would that be kind of like the Methuselah thing where?
I don't think so. I will say this just to sort of connect the dot for you. Dan and Dinah, Dinah is the feminine form of Dan. So when we get to Dinah, I'll get in front of my skis just a little. It is the feminine form of Dan to judge. But if there is, I don't know it, Kristen, so let me be crystal clear. So if you know it, you need to tell us. Okay. He said, if you got something there, you need to share with us. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Verse 9. When Leah saw, that she had ceased bearing children, she went and had a glass of tea and relaxed. No. She took her servant, Zilpah, and gave her to Jacob his wife. Ding, ding! The wrestling match is on. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. What's happening here is his home is exploding, but so is the chaos, the confusion, the strife, the problems. All of these are equally growing together. She recognizes, I'm not bearing any more children. I'm going to bring Zilpah, which means trickling. I'm going to bring Zilpah into the mix. Verse 10, Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. We imagine it was going to happen. And Leah said, good fortune has come to me. God, fortune. So she named him God, Gad, fortune. She named him what was coming into her life. Good fortune is coming to my life. If you're keeping score at home, we've got 4 plus 2 plus 1 is 7. 5 that are credited to Leah, 2 Bilhah, 1 Zilpah. I know it's hard to keep track of. Verse 12. Imagine how hard it would be to keep this family going. Imagine what this looked like on the ground. Here we're getting descriptive and not prescriptive. Verse 12. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, and Leah said, happy am I, for women will call me happy. So she named him Asher. Now again, let's be honest here. It wasn't like she said, here, take my servant. He went into the servant, bang a child, and it was all over. He likely went into that servant multiple times. She finally got pregnant. Then she had a baby. 9 months later, he started going back into that servant as this woman is trying to raise children. I want you to just picture what's going on here. Jacob is like a pawn in a chessboard game of let's have the most men, children, and he's just being moved around from place to place as directed. And we'll see some of the direction here in a moment. This is where our brother finds himself. But Leah said, happy am I. The Hebrew word is Osher, so she named the boy Asher, which means happy. And so here we are. Now, I do want to say something so that you have this in your mind. As we've read about these children, it's been 4, then 2, then 2. It likely didn't happen that cleanly. Likely, maybe even between, let's say, Leah's 3rd and 4th child, Rachel's looking over going, I'm not having children, I got an idea. And then she's bringing her servant into the mix. So although we're reading about them like this because that's how they're being presented, it is quite possible that there was overlapping pregnancies. And I would almost guarantee you there were. I wouldn't think it went 4 and then there was like a moment of silence and everything stopped. Oh, 2 new ones. But rather, all of this competition and these women are being cycled in and they're just being presented to us in the groups that they're coming in the rough order. And theologians would agree with that point. I just want you to have it. Now, anything else before we advance the story? Okay. Verse 14. In the days of the wheat harvest, Reuben went. Now, Reuben's the youngest son. He's probably like 5 years old. Let's just put him at 5. If you want to just sort of nail it down somewhere. He's not 7. Okay, so he's less than that. Let's say he's 5. So it's in the days of the wheat harvest. That's May or June time frame. And Reuben goes out. He's a little kid playing around in the dirt, and he finds some mandrakes. He finds them in the field, and he brings them back to his mother, Leah. Then Rachel says to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. Now, when you first read something like this, you're like, this has nothing to do with any of the major consequential stuff we're reading about here. Why do I have this in my story? Well, let me give you a little bit of backdrop here. Mandrakes are also referred to as love apples. They're a small fruit that produces a white reddish blossom, and the fruit itself looks like a little tiny yellow apple. So they're called love apples. Now, maybe you're thinking, well, why are they called love apples? Well, the ancients believed they were an aphrodisiac. They believed that they enhance sexual drive and performance. And so these love apples, now, let's be honest, Reuben had no idea that he was not out looking for, he was the 5-year-old looking for love apples. That's not the story. He's just picking up fruit and flowers, and he gives them to his mom. His mom recognizes what they are. More importantly, Rachel recognizes what they are. What's Rachel's problem? No children. What does Leah have? An aphrodisiac. So what does she say? She goes and says, with the kindest voice I can ever imagine, Deb, dear sister, can I have some of those mandrakes? Now, what does Leah hear? Leah hears, I'm in a competition with you. You're now wanting to take this aphrodisiac. Why? Because you want to take it and you want to give it to Jacob because you're still trying to have children because you want to outperform me because you're in a wrestling match with me. So what do you think went through her mind? No. Who said no way? No way. Ain't happening. Not in this life, sister. You're not getting the mandrakes. That is not happening. Let's look and see what she says. Verse 15. But she, Leah, said to her, Rachel, is it a small matter you've taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? She said, is it a small thing that you've taken away Jacob from me? Now, we don't know exactly what she meant, but I think we have enough of a hint to get the idea. She's like, I married Jacob first, and he spends very little time with me. You have stolen him away from me. And now you want to get the aphrodisiac for sexual performance for you and him? You must be kidding. That's not going to happen. And in this response, just a couple observations that I make. Clearly, Rachel is spending a lot more time with Jacob than Leah. That's part of her response. You have stolen my husband from me. And now you want to steal my son's mandrakes. Oh, I thought you were telling me advance. And notice the word she uses. You've taken him away. Now, let's be honest, though. Can we be honest? Deb, you're on your face. Can we be honest for a second? It was Leah who was, at a minimum, the silent, compliant partner in the stealing away of Jacob from Rachel. It is funny how she looks at her sister and says, you've stolen him away. Yeah, but you stole him away. At least you were silently compliant, if nothing else. And I'm not accusing her of any active, I think Laban was the active guy, but she had to be compliant to keep her mouth shut and to play along. And I'm sure she wanted to get married. I'm sure she saw Jacob as quite a catch. But that doesn't make it right. And here she is laying this at her sister. I would just make another observation. Laban's deception is wreaking havoc in the lives of his daughters, in the lives of his daughter's home. We might even say, if we want to step it back just one level, Jacob's deception. Because you reap what you sow is reaping havoc in his home. I would just say this in closing this point. This is a dysfunctional home. This is a toxic environment. I'm trying to use modern vernacular. These people need counseling. Here's the good news. God's not looking for someone with a perfect past pedigree to do amazing things through them. He's looking for someone who will walk with him in the details of their life. Because you ready for this? We all have things in our past just like this. We all have imperfections, messy spots, blemishes. And God's not looking for someone who has a pedigree, even before they were saved, of perfection. He's looking for someone who will walk with him now and the rest of their lives, with him in the details of their life. That's what he's looking for. That's what he can work with. Someone who will give him the glory and walk with him, and that's what Jacob has become. But here you can see what Miss Rachel says. Hey, hand me over the aphrodisiac. Leah says, ain't going to happen. Let's see what Rachel says. You see it at the back half of verse 15. Rachel responds, then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for the mandrakes. She wanted these mandrakes so badly. She said, okay, I give you Jacob. You can have him tonight. Now that causes a lot of questions. Who's in control of Jacob's time schedule here? Is she in control? Does she make the decisions? Is he on a calendar? I mean, what is going on here? But she says, he will sleep with you for the fruit, and that's how the movie's going to play out. Now, we don't know all the backstory. We don't know if he was on a schedule. We don't know if he was only sleeping with Rachel. We don't know if he was Monday here, Tuesday there, Wednesday there. We do know this. She said he can be yours tonight. Apparently, he wasn't supposed to be. Well, that wasn't on the schedule, and sure enough, that's how it's going to be. Was Rachel running the show? I don't know. I just can tell you what we're reading here in the text. And that's what happened. Verse 16. So when Jacob comes in from the field that evening, so you got to put this in your mind. He's a rancher. He's been working with the goats. He's been working with the sheep. He's had a hard day's night. He's been working like a dog. I mean, he's dirty, he's filthy, he's tired, he's worn out. He's had a rough day. He comes in for the field, and guess who meets him? Leah. And she says, you must come into me, for I've hired you with my son's mandrakes, so that you must lay with me tonight. Just a couple of words should catch your attention. Must. She said, you must come into me. She didn't say, hey, will you, or can you, or I think you should, or hey, I've worked a little deal, so would you comply? You must, because I hired you. I bought you. I purchased you. The Hebrew word is sakar. I hired you. Took that word away. It's coming back around. Verse 17. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Let's just pause for a second. You see, Leah was being mistreated. You see, everything we're thinking is true. Whatever's going on, Leah's on the short end of this stick, and guess who's on Leah's side? The God of glory. A reminder, when you find yourself on the short end of a stick, when you find the deck being stacked against you, that's the perfect place where God can show up and show out in your life if you will trust Him. If you'll not try to get it done in your own power, if I will not try to get it done in my flesh, if I will rely on Him and trust Him and believe in Him and believe that He is working all things together for my good because I love Him and I've been called according to His purposes. If I will find myself there, then I would argue He will show up and show out. And that's what He does here. He listens to Leah. She conceives. She bears Jacob a fifth son. This is her fifth. If you add, let's get the names right. If you add Zilpah, that's 7. And then we have Bilhah, that's 2 more. So we're now up to 5, 7, 9. The tribe is growing. So notice she says in verse 18, God has given me my wages. There it is, Sakar. God has paid me. God has paid me back. And so she names the boy Yissachar, which means there is a payment. God has made the payment. God has heard my plea, and God has made the payment on my behalf. Verse 19. Leah conceived again. So again, picture this isn't one and done, but in I can't imagine what this looked like. These women are just going back and forth, and now she's conceiving again. She bears Jacob a 6th son. Add the 2 is 8. Add the 2 more is 10. We're up to 10 sons altogether. 6 to her. If you add in her servant, 8. And so her 10th son overall, and she says, God has endowed me with a good endowment. God has zabad me with a good zabed. So she names him Zebulon, which means exalted. And here we see the 10th tribe of the nation of Israel as God heard Leah, as God judged on Leah's behalf. And we're now up to 10 sons. Now, in Leah is this ongoing problem, and I say this not to be critical of Leah, I say it so that we can be critical of ourselves. You'll notice every time, with the exception of one, every time she's like, with this child, my husband will love me. With this child, my husband will honor me. With this child, my husband will care about me. With this child, my husband I'll be something in my husband's eyes. I get it. I get it. But I want us to get this. I do not draw my value from Sandy, who loves me dearly, but she will let me down sooner or later. And Sandy should not draw her value from me, because I will let her down sooner than she let me down. Okay? But our Father will never let you down. He will never fail you. He will never come up on the short side of the ledger. He will never come and say, God, I really had hoped you were going to do something marvelous in my life, because we have been blessed with all spiritual blessings in heavenly places in Christ. You and I, if you are a believer, are a child of the King. You've been born again. You're a joint heir with Jesus Christ. God has withheld nothing that heaven has to offer from us. And so may we always get our value from the fact that God himself stepped out of eternity into time in the person of Jesus Christ, the second person of Godhead, and died for you. Gave his life for you to redeem you. That's how valuable you are. So when your spouse, your friend, your neighbor, your mom, your dad lets you down, good news. It was coming. It was going to happen, because you're going to do it too. Look to God, who will never let you down. But you see what's going on here. Verse 21, we'll wrap this part up here. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and named her Dinah. Now, what's interesting, this is the only daughter of Jacob that's named. We know that he had other daughters. It's mentioned multiple times. I'll give you just a couple. Genesis 37:35. This is after Joseph, they think, has been killed. Now, he wasn't killed. He was sold into slavery. But don't worry, that story's coming, so we'll just leave it there. But when word comes back to Dad, all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort Jacob, Israel. But he refused to be comforted. Now, notice it was all his sons and his daughters, but yet only one is named in the scriptures. But we can be sure that there were others. If we were to go to Genesis 46:7, this is when he's going into Egypt. His sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, all the offspring he brought with him into Egypt. He had multiple daughters. Clearly, the scriptures tell us multiple places. The only one named is Dinah. So the question you should have is, why is Dinah named? Well, what's up with that? There's a reason for everything in the scriptures, right? The mandrakes had a reason. Well, to be honest with you, here's what I think. Linda laughed when I said the mandrakes had a reason. As we will see in Genesis 34:35, right in that area, something horrific is about to happen to this young lady. She'll be a lady at the time, Dinah. They live in the land of the Canaanites, and something horrific is going to happen to her. And I think Moses is just setting her up because she's going to be introduced in the narrative later. And we'll see what happens. I'm not going to get in front of my skis on the point, other than that's why I believe she's named. And she is the only named daughter, and it is Genesis 34. I have it here. Because let's be honest, they lived in the land of the Canaanites, that cursed people, and all their sexual debauchery. And it will spill out on Jacob's household. Okay, any other questions, anything else before we advance the story? We've now got everything seemingly done. We've got 11 sons, 1 daughter. We still got Benjamin coming, but not for a minute. Any questions at all before we advance the story? Okay. Verse 27, or 25, sorry. 22. I'll get this right sooner or later. Verse 22. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb, and she conceived and bore a son. And she said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, saying, may the Lord add to me another son. So here's the 11th son. I got a little ahead of myself there. So God remembered Rachel. No doubt Rachel had been praying. God heard her prayer. Now, he didn't remember her in the sense that he had forgotten her. It means he was responding to her in grace. He remembered her. He remembered her pleas, and he stepped into it. Now, she's been pleading. She's been crying out for years, likely around 6 years, if we understand this movie correctly. And God's been silent. And God steps in. She is persevering in prayer, and God answers that prayer. 6 more years since the marriage. So if you gave me that crazy look, you'll see it in a minute. And God steps in and gives this child. And I say all that just to make this point. Pastor has said it before. Perseverance is a feature of prayer and not a fault. Sometimes we need to persevere in our prayer. Now, sometimes God will step in and answer it immediately. We have plenty of those examples. But sometimes God wants to build our faith and our trust in him as we persevere in prayer. She has been praying. God steps in. She conceives. She bears a son. She names him Jacob. I would just remind us, Matthew 7, ask and it shall be given unto you, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. I would remind you what James said, we have not because we ask not, we ask and receive not because we ask amiss, and we may consume it on our lust. She's been crying out to God. God hears her. Guess what? It wasn't the mandrakes she needed. She needed what you and I need, God. When we have a problem, we don't need the mandrakes. We need God to step into it. And God does, and she bears this son. And notice what she says. Make sure I got the right verse. Yeah. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. Asaph. God has taken away, so she names him Yosef. She names him Joseph. God has taken away my reproach. In his name is actually two things, the idea of taking away and the idea of adding. That's what his name means, to take away and to add. Look what she says, verse 24. She called his name Joseph, saying, may the Lord add. But as the Lord has taken away my reproach, may he add to me also one more son. Even in the midst of receiving this son, she's praying that God would give her another one. And indeed, we'll see that he will. But we'll end the story right here for this part of it. We've watched that these children have been born. But all of the main children, the primary children, the big hitters, the lead hitter, the son with the double blessing, Levi, Judah, those were all born to Leah, the hated woman. And then number 11, the slot of insignificance. Should have been insignificant. This should have been a nobody in the 12 sons. But this is a boy who walked with God. To my knowledge, there are only two men in the scriptures outside of Jesus. We don't count him. We don't count the God-man. Who the Bible has nothing, absolutely nothing, even slightly derogatory to say about. And he's one of them. Joseph and Daniel are the only two men I'm aware of that the Bible doesn't have some derogatory statement. Even Paul got in a hot debate, a heated, contested debate, and had to come back and say, yeah, John Mark is valuable. It's only these two men, this 11th son, and that's my point. The order's irrelevant. What matters is will we walk with God in the detail of our life? Will we fulfill our call and walk with him, or we'll be off doing our own thing? That's what matters. Because God can use the first one. That's who he can use for his glory. And that's what he does, as we will see in the life of this 11th son, as he uses him to protect the nation. Verse 25. As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own country and my own home. That's why scholars believe 7 years to marry the two girls. Now Joseph is born somewhere around the time that the second 7 years is complete. This boy is born. Guess what he does? He goes into Laban and says, it is done. I have paid the price. The 14-year deal is finished. I have finished my course. I've done a good job for you. My debt is paid in full. Send me home. Send me back home. Send me to Beersheba. Give me your blessings and send me and my extended family on our way. That is exactly what he said. That means that Joseph would have been born, if theologians are understanding this point right, and Sandy's saying that's pretty tight living, would have been born at the end of, near the end of that 7-year contract. That's why they believe that. That's why if you look at my timeline, that's why I put it there. I'll leave you to puzzle over that. Now, something I didn't say, but because Sandy continues to shake her head, I have to say. As long as she keeps telling me no, I'm going to keep talking until I win her over. Because I have to take her home, so I'm just kidding. No, I do have to take her home. I want to think about it. All right. So we're in her car, so maybe I'm the one not going home. Keep in mind, and I don't know if I said it in this class because I've taught this once, more than likely, some of these women were pregnant at the same time. Did I say that already? Okay, then I'll leave that alone. So keep in mind, when we read it, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. That's likely not how it played out. 1, 2, 3, oh, here, this one's getting pregnant, and then this one's born, oh, then that one's born. You see, they're overlapping more than likely. Because the women, we have 4 in the game, more than one can be pregnant at the same time. Okay, just make sure you guys knew the birds and the bees before we kept going. Okay, so as we think about this, just to get this all in our mind, he's ready to go back home. We'll look at his family. So here's his family right now, right? Abram and Sarah, Is that too small? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove Hagar, remove Keturah, remove Ruma, remove the concubines, and we'll see if this helps. So here's Abram and Sarai. They give birth to Isaac. Isaac marries Rebekah, gives birth to Esau and Jacob. I took his sons off to keep this tight. Jacob marries Leah, Rachel, as well as Bilhah and Zilpah, their handmaids. And then we have those 7 born of Leah, those two, and the 1 so far born of Rachel. There's what the family looks like. 12 kids, 11 boys, 1 girl that we're aware of. Could there have been other girls? Maybe, maybe not. There will be other girls for sure ultimately later. But here's what we know about right now. And he says, send me back to Beersheba. Time to go home. I'm done here. 14 years, I am paid in full. Now, as I typed that, I couldn't help. Now, this has nothing to do with anything of this story. But I couldn't help but think back to what our Lord said as he hung on the cross. When Jesus had therefore received the vinegar, he said to Telestai. Now, it's translated in English as it is finished. That's not a real good translation. Tetelestai is all over the Roman world on every pay document we find where somebody owed a debt. Paid in full, debt discharged, paid in full. Now, I realize when Jacob looked at Laban and said paid in full, he wasn't thinking of Jesus. I'm not trying to connect any dots. Let me connect the dot. Jesus has paid your debt in full. It is paid. It is finished. The deal is sealed. Place faith in him and have eternal life. He has paid the debt in full. It is discharged to Telestai. But let's get back to our story. I'm sorry I had to take us just a small rabbit trail, but just thinking about Jacob made me think about that. Verse 27. Laban said to him, if I found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that Yahweh has blessed me because of you. Name your wages and I will give it. Man, what a nice guy. Frank Laban's a good guy. Divination? What? So he's involved in some type of occultic practice, some type of pagan deal. And through this pagan practice, we're not exactly told what. By the way, the etymology of that word comes from the word serpent. I'm just saying. I'm not trying to draw any conclusion there. I'm just saying. But through divination, he learns that Yahweh has blessed him because of Jacob. And so he looks at Jacob and says, you are so highly valued by me. You just name your wage and I will pay it. By the way, that is not true at all. He is working to defraud Jacob all over the place, but just follow the story. That's what he says. Obviously, being blessed is part of the Abrahamic covenant, the promise that those who bless these descendants of the Abrahamic covenant will be blessed, and that's what he's enjoying. The 14 years are complete, though, and Jacob now responds. Jacob says to him, you yourself know how I served you and how your livestock fared with me. He goes, you know what's going down. You know I've been a good servant. You know I've taken care of these goats and I've taken care of these sheep. Going to verse 30, look at what he says. You had little before I came. You had 3 goats and 2 sheep when I got here, partner. And look what he says next. And it has increased abundantly. The Hebrew means to break forth, like you would break forth a dam with water. He said, you had little by way of flocks, and they have exploded since I've been around here. Let's keep reading what he says. They've increased abundantly, and Yahweh has blessed you wherever I turn. You've been enjoying the blessings of God through me. It's because of me you've been being blessed. But let's be honest, Laban had already admitted that. Laban had already much admitted that that's what was going on. But then Jacob says this, and here's the whole point for Jacob. But now what shall I provide for my own household? Jacob's like, I showed up here as a single guy. It's been 14 years, and here I am. Look behind me. There's 12 children and 4 wives, at least. I've got quite a company to feed. These arrangements don't work anymore. I'm done. I've got to go because I've got a massive family to take care of. And we get it. That's true. We're right with him. So we understand exactly what he's saying. Verse 31. He says to him, that's Laban says to Jacob, what shall I give you? Look at what Jacob says. You shall not give me anything. Let that sink in, because that's going to handle how you interpret what you read next. Laban says, what do you want me to give you? Jacob says, partner, I don't want you to give me anything. Then he's going to tell him the deal that he wants him to sign on to. So I want you, this deal is understood in two ways, but I want you to hear what Jacob said. You're not going to give me anything. I don't want nothing from you. And then he's going to tell him the deal. And I'll explain to you the two ways theologians believe this deal. So let's read it. He goes on to say, if you will do this, and he's about to tell him what, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled, spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. Now, theologians believe this in two different ways. I'll let you decide which way you believe. Option one is that what Jacob is saying is, listen, most of your flock are solid colored or they're white sheep, not black sheep. You have a few black sheep over there and you have some spotted goats and sheep. Let me go through, take the spotted and the black sheep. They are my wages. They become mine. The rest is yours. I'll shepherd your flocks. That's how some theologians believe it. Other theologians, in particular John Gill, Arnold Fruchtenbaum, Henry Morris, guys who I read behind, including an eminent Hebrew scholar, said, no, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is, from this point forward, only the spotted and the speckled and the black sheep will be mine. Everything that's born from this point forward, spotted and speckled or black sheep, will be my hire. So he's looking at these animals. They're principally solid color and white sheep. But he's saying, hey, I'll just, from here, these are all yours, but anything spotted and speckled from here becomes mine. You give me nothing, that's the deal. Now, what do you think Laban would think of that deal? This massive number of animals, most of them are solid colored, the sheep are white. He's like, yeah, give you nothing? You just get babies that are spotted and speckled when there's not many of those in the pack anyway? Sounds like a great deal to me. Let's see what Laban says. Verse 33, though, before we get to Laban, Jacob explains why. So my honesty, let me make sure, am I at 33? Yeah, caught myself. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look into my wages. Every one that's not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if it's found with me, it's stolen. He's saying this will be easy. My herd will be all the speckled and spotted stuff that's been born from this point forward, or the black sheep. And again, we can imagine Laban is going to say, let me think about this for a couple months and I'll get back to you. No, that's not what he's going to say at all. Verse 34, Laban said, good, let it be as you've said. That's a deal. Let's do it. But it's even more than that. Laban is a cheat. Here's a deal where Jacob has said, listen, you don't have to give me anything. I'm just going to take the spotted and the speckled, which aren't many in the herd anyway, and the black sheep, which aren't many in the herd. That's all I'm going to get. Any new ones, they're mine. Laban loves that deal, but you know what? Laban can't stand to see Jacob advance at all. So look what Laban does. Verse 35. That day, Laban removed from the male goats that which were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and he put them in the charge of his son and ran them off out of the way. He stole out of the flock everything that was likely to produce a speckled and spotted lamb, or speckled and spotted goat, or a black lamb, and separated them so that their herd was nothing but white sheep and solid-colored goats and sheep, or solid-colored goats and white sheep. Because he is cheating Jacob once again. But there's a God in heaven. Just remember that. When men do you wrong, when men stack the deck against you, there is a God in heaven who's watching to see what you do when the deck is stacked against you by another human. And so we see what's done to Jacob by Laban. Verse 36, further, to make sure, he sets a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastures the rest of Laban's flock. Can you imagine what it was like for Jacob to walk out there and there's not a single speckled or spotted animal? He was thinking, I'll get all these speckled and spotted to mix and match, and I'll get some speckled and spotted. Statistically, it won't be as many. He'll still be getting blessed, but I'll be getting blessed too. Hallelujah. And he walks out and there's not a black lamb to be found. There's not a speckled and spotted animal to be found. That's where he finds himself, because Laban has stole them all away and driven them 3 days so that there's no crossbreeding with those animals. That's where our story takes us. Verse 37. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. We're about to get to a weird part of the story. Don't worry, I'll explain what theologians believe. But understand just let the story flow. This happens, and now we're told about Jacob getting these three types of wood and peeling the bark off the limbs so that the white is exposed. Interesting. Why would he do that? We'll see in a moment, and then we'll talk about it. Verse 38. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is the watering places where the flocks came to drink, since they bred when they came to drink. Okay, so he takes this peeled wood, these three types of wood, and there's streaks in them, and he knows that they come to drink at these watering troughs, and that's also where they breed. And so he sets these sticks before the place where these animals breed. So let me give you the two opinions on this text. Opinion number one is that Jacob was an ignorant schmuck, and he believed in some type of prenatal influence. And that as these lambs looked at the stripes in the wood, they would somehow produce striped lambs. Now, of course, that's very unscientific. Nobody would believe that today. That would be like sort of crazy. That would be like saying, I'll keep my wife looking at this blue wall until she has our baby, and he'll be blue. That's just not how it works. But the theologians believe that's what Jacob was doing. It was superstitious, and ultimately God blessed it. I don't think that's what's going on here. Watch the text develop. What I think is going on is Jacob, who's been a herder all his life, who's raised sheep and goats now for 90 years plus, well, probably not in his young age, let's just say 80 years plus, has learned things, and probably he's learned that there are things you can do that will motivate the animals to mate. And he believes that this taking wood and producing these white stripes in it and putting it at the water troughs will encourage these animals to mate. He believes statistically, as the animals, the more they mate, the more animals that'll be produced. Now, Laban's going to be blessed the biggest, but he's going to be blessed. So he's just playing the odds. He's just encouraging the animals to mate, knowing that he will get some of the overflow, although Laban will get most of it. By the way, that's not how it's going to work, but that's what I think he's thinking. So let's keep advancing the story. So we see what he's doing. He's laying these things out. And by the way, just so you know, Fruchtenbaum, Henry Morris, and John Gill all believe the latter. They all believe that he understood something about mating and causing these animals to mate that these white stripes did. That's why he put it at the place where they mated to encourage them to mate. And indeed, these theologians would argue it worked. But don't worry, God's got a whole different deal going. Verse 39. The flocks indeed bred in front of the sticks, and the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. This is statistically not likely. Now, there's recessive traits in these sheep and these goats. We get it. But the great majority should have been solid colored, and the great majority should have been white lambs. But that's not what happened. The great majority were spotted and speckled and black lambs. What's going on here? Let's keep reading. Verse 40. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the face of the flocks toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart, and he did not put them in Laban's flock. Verse 41. Whenever the stronger the flock came there to the water troughs, he would put down the sticks, and they were breeding. He would lay their sticks before their eyes because he was trying to generate strong animals. Verse 42. The feebler ones he wouldn't put the sticks before. Those belong to Laban, so Laban's feebler animals are happening. The stronger spotted and speckled are going to him. And we get to verse 43. Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants, male servants, camels and donkeys. At year 14, he had nothing. 6 years later, he is a very wealthy man. We're going to see it next week. I'll show it to you, some of it here in a second. But he is being mightily blessed by God, and he is now extremely wealthy. He has many servants now. He has camels. He has donkeys. He has many animals now. Laban's sons are beginning to feel that he's stolen these animals from Laban. Laban is beginning to look at him differently. The question for you and I, though, what does Jacob think has gone down? There's two options here. Number one is Jacob thinks this: I am a clever cat. I've been stripping this wood because of prenatal influence, and it worked. I am quite the clever person. I've done this all on my own. I am to be applauded that I figured this out. Or he thinks something different. Let's see what he thinks, and we know what he thinks because he tells us why is what he thinks. Oh, question.
Real quick, Rich, and excuse my
Oh,
ignorance,
Sean.
but the spotted, speckled, striped, those were known to be lesser because they were imperfect or impure. So are we to assume that they're not necessarily graded that way yet because we don't have the sacrificial? Okay, thank
That's
you.
exactly right. And so genetically, there was no difference other than they were spotted and speckled. And again, genetically, he was putting the sticks out when the stronger animals came to drink because he was trying to get the stronger animals to breed because he wanted to strip strong animals that were spotted and speckled. Now, that was equally going to mean Laban got some strong ones, but he didn't care about that. He's just working, I got to build some animals here. I got a 12-person family at a minimum. And then I want to advance what he's thinking. But Trish got a question. But I want you to see what he's thinking.
But don't you think that God would have given him this direction? And
He
as
did.
crazy as that
He
sounds,
did.
to say, are you going to be faithful and put these sticks out even though this seems crazy?
Trish is right.
Oh.
God told him this. See, the truth is, this wasn't cleverness on his part. So let's look at, we'll end here for you, and we'll see where we land. So I'm going to bring you into a discussion that he has with Leah and with Rachel. He brings them outside the tent into the field to talk to them. And here's what he says to them. He says, your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. We didn't know anything about that. But that's what's been going down. He's been changing this whole time. He's been saying, okay, spotted. They start producing spotted. No, I meant speckled. They start producing speckled. No, I meant striped. They start producing striped. Purple, they start producing purple. He's just been changing the wages. And that's what Jacob's telling his wives. Let's follow this up. What else he says? But Jacob's been changing, or Laban's been changing the wages, but God did not permit him to harm me. If he, that's Laban, said the spotted shall be yours, then all the flock bore spotted. If he said, that's Laban, the striped shall be yours, then all the flock bore striped. If he said, all the flock bore purple, then they bore purple. And I'll just read the rest of the verses. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. So he had this dream, and in the dream, there were striped, spotted, and mottled goats mating. But he didn't have any of those. But in the dream, that's what was mating. Verse 11, then the angel of Yahweh, the angel of God, said to me, Jacob? He said, here I am. He said, lift up your eyes and see. All the goats that mate with the flocks are striped, spotted, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. No matter what Laban said, that's what was produced because God had stepped into the equation. And I end there. We're out of time. You see, when someone stacks the deck against you, you don't need to fight in your own flesh against it. You need to give it to God because when he leans into it, he will fix it. And he is the one who gave Jacob the mighty increase. It wasn't because Jacob was clever. It was because God is awesome. And he gave the riches to Jacob. And that's where we end today's lesson. Let's pray.